My name is Nick Dalton. I am completely ordinary in every aspect. Well, I guess you can call me a bit short and thin. My motto, which I haven't expressed throughout my life, has been don't go with the flow. My life was quiet, average, and perfect for me. I didn't make much money, but I managed somehow. I had a good job, though it didn't inspire enthusiastic jokes at parties. I dated several women, had serious relationships with even fewer, and eventually married a woman named Kelly. She became my wife, and only with her did I feel special. Don't get me wrong, I didn't have a philosophy of live for yourself and let others live, not at all. But even I admit that it's nice to win the championship, to earn an award. That's how I reacted to marrying Kelly, and after our years together, she still makes me feel like a gold medalist in a relationship. One peculiar snake that slithered into my garden was another employee of my company, Jack Neese. While I worked in climate control, he worked in the reception and delivery department. He was everything I was not: tall, well-built, attractive, and completely self-centered. From what little I've learned over the years working in the same place, he had once played sports in college or something like that. Those days were behind him, but he worked to maintain his physique and attitude. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're the only one not buying into someone's nonsense at our company? Everyone, men and women alike, seemed to hang on every word Jack said. People laughed at his jokes, guys rallied around to cheer him on when he boasted of his exploits, and he shamelessly flirted with all the attractive women in the office, married or not. Plus, he could go to lunch whenever he pleased and finish work early without fear of repercussions from management. Well, you get the general idea by now. All that time, I wondered how each of these generally intelligent people could fall under his spell. Of course, those things were annoying, but I don't want to give the impression that I was obsessed with it. It's just an observation. I stood my ground, did my job, and went home to Kelly. Jack and I never crossed paths at work, so I kept quiet. After all, I didn't want to cause trouble, so I don't understand why Jack decided to target me. Maybe he noticed that he wasn't making the right impression on me. Perhaps he was right for the classic bully-victim relationship, but he was coming after me. It all started small, with little things like when the guys egged each other on, making fun of my height and size. There were rare occasions when I needed to go down to the loading dock for paperwork, and he would ask if I needed help getting it off the table or something like that. His entourage laughed, and I laughed, playing along with him and making it clear that I wasn't paying him any mind. For some reason, Jack Neese decided that Nick Dalton was his new source of entertainment at work. It didn't take long before I became Nicky's baby. Yes, this nickname had been applied to me occasionally in my youth, but now I was being called that at work, where grown professionals congregated. Sometimes, in the presence of superiors, looking back, I realized that my usual tactics actually worked against me, but it was a lifelong trait that couldn't be overcome at once. Plus, I thought that if I confronted him, he would laugh it off and pat me on the shoulder, saying he was just joking. If I had gotten angry enough to file a complaint, it's unlikely anything would have happened to the golden boy. Don't forget, whether I was wrong or not, I still didn't believe I was weak. I was convinced that I hadn't crossed the threshold beyond which I should start taking action. Perhaps, looking back, I am partly responsible for the events that were about to unfold, creating the conditions in which the seeds could take root. All of this had been going on for several months when Jack decided to escalate the situation. They brought me a package of important documents from another office. Jack noticed my name on the package as he passed by the mail cart and decided to deliver it himself. Don't yawn, Nicky, special delivery. That was the only warning before the overstuffed envelope crashed onto my desk, spinning and then falling to the floor, knocking over a double-folded photo frame. There were 2 pictures in it, my wedding photo with Kelly and her posing on the beach in a bikini from our last vacation. Since it landed on my desk, and Jack tossed the package partially for him, he quickly picked up the fallen photo frame. "Hey, Nicky, my apologies," Jack said with a malicious smile on his face, insincere and condescending in tone as he straightened with the photos in hand. I made the most aggressive gesture towards him that I had made up to that point, trying to snatch them away, but he easily dodged and turned to look at them. He looked my wife up and down with an approving smile. "Not bad, Nicky boy. I can't imagine how you managed to keep her." Since it was just the 2 of us this time, I felt much less playfulness and more genuine disdain in his tone. Similarly, I didn't force a smile. After staring at someone else's wife for too long, he casually tossed the double frame onto the package and headed for the door. "Send this mare over so I can ride her a bit. A wild one like her will toss you off any time." "I'd be doing you a favor," he sneered over his shoulder. It seemed to me that, for the first time, something inside me was beginning to tighten. After that, however, nothing special happened. In fact, the relationship between Jack and me was as quiet as it had been before all this began. Too quiet, I should have thought. I was glad to have eased the tension and believed that my personal philosophy had weathered the storm and could set sail again. Shortly after, the company's annual summer picnic took place. I had just arrived in the parking lot and was watching Kelly check her hair and makeup one last time in the visor mirror. It was one of those small moments when you fall in love with a person all over again. I sat there, thanking the Almighty, gazing at the vision of my wife when she noticed me looking. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Should I even know?" "What? I just thought it was time for us to go on vacation again." "Really? Is that all?" she replied. "Maybe deep down in my heart, I'm thinking of that day in my office somewhere warm and sunny with a beach. Maybe we'll buy you a new bikini, or we could even go somewhere where you don't need it, huh? Would you like that?" I playfully stroked her hand. "Let's go with that." She got out of the car, and I followed. My good mood was short-lived. Jack Mees arrived, in his own way, but that didn't stop him from gathering a crowd around him. There was always a group of guys around him, laughing at any nonsense he spouted. I managed to keep Kelly and me at a comfortable distance while we ate barbecue and socialized. However, I noticed my wife glancing over at a group of people from time to time and clearly curious about what was going on there. My luck was about to run out. Jack, of course, stationed himself by the drinks, and at some point, we had to refill. I did my best to carry our drinks going literally back and forth, noticing Kelly's reluctance to move away from the drink area. I almost breathed a sigh of relief when she noticed me. "Hey, little Nicky," he yelled, stopping us in our tracks. "Does your mom know you're secretly drinking beer?" There was an immediate burst of laughter from our colleagues around us, as well as from the guests who didn't know any of us until today. "Come on," he said, approaching us so that our size difference was obvious. "I'll have to see some ID before letting you take her away." There was another burst of laughter, but I hardly paid attention. The reason was that this time, another laugh joined the mix, my wife's laughter. The sound, which had been as crystalline and angelic as I practically lived for, now sounded as sharp as a beginner musician trying to play the clarinet. I couldn't help but look at her. I wasn't the only one who caught the sound, and although I'm sure up to this point I had been staring at her summer dress's modest neckline more than he had, Jack expertly pretended to notice Kelly for the first time. "Well, hello there, I know you. You're that beautiful woman with good taste in swimwear," he said with a twisted smile. "Sorry," she replied. Her tone betrayed her surprise at her audacity, but suspiciously, there was no anger in it. In fact, there was a hint of a smile on her lips. My heart pricked. "Yes, Nikki likes to show you off to the guys, shows them all a picture of your incredible figure. I must say the photo doesn't do you justice." "Really?" Now there was anger in her voice. But it wasn't directed at Jack. Her annoyance at his little harmless lie was nothing compared to the storm raging inside me right now. I admit I was more than irritated that she seemed to immediately believe the lies of a man she had never met, especially because it went 180 degrees against what I was doing. In fact, everyone here knew that if they hadn't been personally seated at my desk, they hadn't seen this photo, but not a single soul told him he was talking nonsense, and if I started denying it, I would seem fake, whiny, and self-centered. I was trapped, but my fury was primarily directed at Jack Mees. My face flushed instantly with anger and humiliation, as if I had been burnt under the sun for 6 hours. This jackass couldn't count all his fingers and toes without a calculator, but at the same time, he easily manipulated everyone around him, including my wife, and therefore, me. He still wore those glasses. Why did no one else but me see him for what he really was? His eyes were fixed on her. Now he was looking at Kelly, and his body language didn't go unnoticed. It said I wasn't there, but his words were meant for both of us. "I'd like to take you out sometime, that's it. If you ever manage to free yourself from the responsibilities of taking care of the kids." Laughter rang out again, though more awkwardly and disconnected. After all, at least some of my colleagues had some decency. My wife, on the other hand, covered her mouth in shock, but her cheeks betrayed a mocking smile and her eyes sparkled. I saw it at that moment. I thought I didn't stand a chance, definitely had no support, especially where I should have had it. Suddenly, I lost the desire to drink, eat, or celebrate. I declined the beer and headed for the exit. I began walking, took Kelly's hand in mine. For a brief moment, she resisted the force pulling her before some part of her brain kicked in and she followed me. Maybe she simply didn't expect a sudden departure, but I took her resistance as another mini betrayal and let go of her hand like a hot potato, even before her legs began to move. I strode forward with determined but unhurried steps, vaguely aware that Kelly was making typical excuses to the crowd before following me. Jack called after me, "Hey, come on, Nikki, I was just kidding, don't be a monster. God knows I wouldn't want to cross you for anything." This caused even more laughter, including Kelly's laughter, whose beginning I heard before it stopped. She simply couldn't help it. For a moment, it occurred to me that, for once in his life, Jack might wonder if he had gone too far, but no, that would require self-reflection he didn't possess. Even if by some miracle he did, his pride would demand that he stay true to himself to save face. I walked a distance and sat down on a picnic bench, staring into space. Kelly stood just behind me, observing the drama on my face. I could feel several emotions boiling within her, taking turns dominating her thoughts. Finally, she spoke. Was this demonstration really necessary? I looked at her incredulously. I mean, your friend put you in an awkward position, and yes, it was rude, but he was just joking, it was obvious. He probably does it a lot. I got up slowly and looked at her face. My friend. Well, never mind, I don't know, she decided to change tactics. Hey, if you don't want guys flirting with your wife, maybe you shouldn't showcase the product to your colleagues. I could only slightly shake my head with closed eyes and deny her several times. Frustrated, Kelly completely misread my body language. Look, why don't we go and sort this out? I'm sure we can all gather, exchange apologies, and understand that it was just a simple misunderstanding, she said, pointing her thumb back to where we came from. I thought for a moment before responding. No, thank you, I understood everything perfectly, and my day, anyway, is ruined. I turned around and headed for the car. When I got there, I realized I had made this trip alone. I looked back and saw her in the distance at the drink table. I thought for a moment, biting my tongue as my vision was clouded with red. Then I got into the car and started it to turn on the air conditioning. I stayed for a while studying the manufacturer's logo on the steering wheel while the interior cooled down. Although my anger wasn't cooling down, in the end, I told myself, I've had enough, and I put it in reverse. As I began to drive, I heard a knock on the passenger window. Kelly was standing there, showing me a gesture. What are you doing? I reversed the car back into the parking lot, the doors unlocked, and my wife got inside in a fit of irritation. What's your problem? I just came to offer our apologies, and Mr. Neese was kind enough to apologize too, she said apologetically. Why is this guy a first-class jerk? There were many things today, but when it comes to him, there was nothing atypical. Wait, Mr. Neese, Kelly was surprised for a moment because I repeat, never say that. It should have been a warning sign for her, but she overlooked it because the 5 minutes she spent with him told her otherwise. Then she briefly blushed at the name of her new acquaintance, but then, in a subconscious attempt to stay on top, she returned to feeling angry. Great, I tried to do the right thing, but you decided to attack me. I can't believe you're behaving like this. I never thought you'd be so childish. Do I really have to take care of you, huh? I have no idea what was reflected on my face, but whatever it was, it left her speechless. She stepped away but didn't apologize, apparently believing that I should apologize. The trip home was silent. Of course, I was lost in my thoughts, and I assumed she was too. But the only time I ventured to look in her direction, I saw a faint reflection of her face in the window. It was faded, but there was a smile on her face. As much as I didn't deserve Jack Neese to enter my life, I didn't deserve my life partner taking his side. The next workday after the picnic, Jack tried to publicly accept my apologies, which I never presented. I barely caught the thinly veiled mockery, but now, for a different reason, I wasn't loose anymore. I locked myself in stone for the first time in my life. I wasn't going with the flow. Now there was resentment in me. His comment was just thrown onto the general heap. I arguably had a kind of crisis of faith for the first time in my life. My lifelong defense mechanism failed me. I found it difficult to deal with this, which is understandable. The more I thought about my wife, the worse the taste in my mouth became. Supposedly, in a few days, the man should rethink and apologize, but I had nothing to apologize for, and winning Kelly's forgiveness was impossible. In fact, not even getting an apology from her interested me. I realized I didn't care. Weeks passed, and there was calm on the front again. I didn't hear a sound from Jack at work, but I noticed his wolfish smile when he thought I couldn't see. My new focus was also on work. Nobody talked to me in the office unless it was about work. I felt their discomfort around me. I felt their pitying looks. I started to hate them all. My boss assigned me challenging tasks and thought he was doing it subtly enough for me not to notice. I thought it was all rumors received after my humiliation at the picnic, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. There was much more in the looks they threw at me. As I soon discovered, the final death of my old life occurred in the men's restroom in the main lobby of my company. I normally didn't use this place, but I became so withdrawn, resentful, and bitter with everything. I thought about how all this was consuming me from the inside. Looking at the dinner cooked at my table, I decided that if Jack could afford long lunches, then so could I. I tossed my lunch in the trash and headed for the main entrance, thinking that there's a high-quality steakhouse in the city center. On the way, I wanted to go to the bathroom and went to the restroom. I had just finished and was about to reach out to flush when two guys approached the urinals. They weren't exactly quiet, but they thought they were alone. I recognized them by their voices, but I didn't know which one was which, Mike and Gaben. Both of them worked with cowls at the loading dock and were a pair of lackeys. "Hey, are you sure you want wings?" "We have time to go get a steak," said the guy whose name I think was Gaben. "Only after payday. My wife will get rid of me," Mike replied. Apparently, Gaben chuckled briefly. Mike felt the need to clarify this statement. "Hey, not all of us can be Jacks." "I still can't believe he's sleeping with Nikki's wife. What did he say?" "Rhyme, do you think so? Is that arrogance even for him?" "Oh yeah, it is," Gaben said. "Since then, right after the barbecue. He practically picked her up there, told me he'd have her hooked by the next week. They meet for lunch. Do you think little Nikki knows?" Mike asked. "Who knows, buddy?" "And who cares?" They laughed, rinsed off. "They never noticed me." "Well, how is that possible?" My first reaction was at this moment when I learned that it's possible to be shocked without being surprised. Unlike the guy who was here a minute ago, I had no doubt that what I heard was true. It made a lot of pieces fit in my mind. But that doesn't mean that what I heard out loud didn't hit like a sledgehammer. The looks my colleagues were giving me now made even more sense. I finished my business on autopilot, not even paying attention to my reflection in the mirror as I washed my face. The only thought in my head was that I no longer had an appetite, and when my car left the parking lot, I wasn't going to the city center. If I had any doubts before arriving home, they would have dissipated when I saw Kelly's car and a van parked in the driveway that I could assume belonged to Kaus. The neighbors are as aware of what's happening as my colleagues, I thought dejectedly. It still seems strange to me. I should have felt devastated in all of this. Maybe I was, but the blue color of distress was completely washed out by the red of the anger of betrayal. My anger was a red-hot ember in the pit of my stomach. When I reached the front door, it struck me that I wasn't afraid of Jack at all at that moment. All my cognitive abilities were occupied with revenge. I had heard the expression "seeing red." Now I knew exactly what it meant. They were heard through the door, but as soon as I opened it, the sound became unmistakable. There was a brief walk on the carpet to visually confirm the reality of my marriage. Both of them were completely naked. So, they decided not to hurry. From my position at the door and considering the position of our bed, I was mostly behind them but at enough of an angle to see their silhouettes. I've seen enough. I turned around and backed up against the wall next to the entrance, out of their sight. Not that I needed to be especially cautious. I was still furious, but strangely, upon seeing them with my own eyes, I sank a bit to the ground. I wasn't going to attack. I had to weigh my options. From somewhere deep in my psyche, my former self resurfaced. Wait, nothing good will come of this. You can't do anything without making the situation worse. Just go back and eat something. Pretend you didn't see anything. But as quickly as the new me pressed, the old me retreated. You've stayed away from this all your life. Look where it's gotten you. I started thinking, looking towards the room. For a second, my gaze landed on the back of Jack's head. There was no doubt he was angry with my wife, but he started all of this. Kelly made the decision to betray me, but he's been pushing her since he saw her picture. As angry as I wasn't a fool. If I confronted him, he'd put me in a coma, and my sweetheart would probably laugh and go nuts watching what was happening. Then he'd tell the police that I was the one who attacked him. Even if I did hit him, he'd recover quickly. Maybe if I had a gun, a baseball bat, or maybe I have a crowbar in my garage, a good hit to the head might help, but it's possible I could kill him. I would be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about killing at that moment, and I didn't care about the consequences, but I knew I didn't want Jack Neese to die that day. I wanted him to regret his decision for a long time. In that moment, I saw the light. It wasn't just about me, it was about him, Jack Neese. He had a large balance on his karmic credit card. He had lived a good life, but today was the day of reckoning, and today he would face the consequences and regret it. Now I felt that my revenge was not only justified, but I was an instrument of justice. I had to balance the cosmic scales on Jack.so. What could I do? I was outnumbered. What do you do when you're physically superior? You need to outsmart your enemy. Granted, he's the kind of guy who can always find work as a fence post if deliveries don't pay, but what good is that to me? What else can I do? Come and ask him a math problem? No. I couldn't fight him, and my cunning wouldn't be useful at this moment. No, for that, I had to drive my enemy insane. I've been veering my whole life. My wife and Jack took advantage of this to betray me behind my back. It's time for a sharp turn. You might be surprised how long I've been thinking about this under the noise of the man I hated most in the world, sleeping with my former love in my own bed. In truth, my neurons were working so fast that these countless thoughts passed through my mind in nanoseconds to read and even more to write. This thought takes longer than thinking it. I silently descended the stairs. Not that I needed to be very quiet, but I wanted to make sure they didn't notice. I sneaked into the garage in the closet above the small built-in workbench. I took out my trusty and nearly full can of WD-40, then went back inside. I headed to the decorative fireplace, where Kelly kept her scented candles, and picked up the lighter she kept there. After finishing my preparations, I silently returned to the room. When I approached stealthily from behind him, luck was finally on my side. I noticed that Jack looked like a natural male, quite hairy, and obviously didn't believe in personal grooming. That was even better for me. When I was about to aim, his grunts became louder and more frantic. Although Jack probably thought that someday he might catch them off guard, maybe even hoped for it, he didn't seem to allow even the idea of me defeating him. I can imagine how he thought I would cry or shout for help. Maybe he thought I'd pounce on him and give him a chance to beat me senseless. Therefore, there was no doubt that the hissing behind him, then the oily sensation on his back, and the sudden sharp smell of every man's favorite lubricant outside the bedroom all seemed so alien to him at that moment that his brain couldn't even register it for a long second. Besides, he was on the verge of exploding. Which one? That was all he could say, turning around too late to avoid his hairy back being covered in oil, while he remained just as hairy in the front. Instinctively, he closed his eyes when a fine mist reached his face, which worked, but not before he saw me. I hope in that moment he had the presence of mind to understand what was about to happen to him. Now, maybe there was enough time to not take it seriously. After all, no one can be that crazy, right? I turned the lighter wheel and held it in front of the spray cone. The effect was so unexpected that it even surprised me slightly. The mist turned from a reliable lubricant into a flame jet 1 second later. The screaming began. It's true that his first priority was probably to hit the jar out of my hand. After that, he took a couple of clumsy steps towards me, waving both hands. His size was working against him as I dodged his punch. Now we switched places in the room, and I quickly resumed the massacre, mainly locating myself to make sure he didn't interfere. He crawled to the edge of the bed and curled up in a fetal position with wide-open eyes due to shock and horror. The primitive lust instinct in her disappeared immediately when it was replaced by an even more primitive instinct, to get away from the fire. Since he was in a panic, he moved aimlessly towards our dresser, shouting incoherently and waving his arms. The idea crossed my mind that the room could catch fire, but there was nothing flammable in his immediate vicinity. As long as he kept moving, I didn't care either. It was fun to see the figure in flames lose composure. Obviously, he wasn't thinking clearly. I just found my wife in bed with another man, but the repressed one couldn't think clearly. After all, he was on fire at that moment. A thought struck me. If it were a movie or something, the protagonist would have a clever line ready. For the first time since it all began, I felt the need to say something. "Hey, Yaki, light up." Well, I wish I could have come up with something better, but it was in the moment. The main thing was that I wanted my words to be etched into his memory forever. Finally, some part of his gray matter worked. He fell to the floor and started rolling. Right after, I noticed the carpet was burning. The flames gave way to smoke, and the air filled with a pungent smell. His agonizing screams subsided, turning into pitiful moans of agony. I realized someone was laughing maniacally, and then I realized it was me, and I stopped. Standing there, I wasn't angry anymore. I felt no anger or pain from the betrayal. All I felt at that moment was exhilaration, triumph over the enemy. I briefly examined my bedroom, confident there wouldn't be a fire in the house. Then I took one last look at Kelly. She turned pale under my gaze, fearing that she might be next, but I wasn't going to hurt her. When I turned to leave, I thought I saw remorse in her eyes, as if the scales of the past few weeks had fallen from her eyes. Well, now it's too late. As I made my way to the front door, the smoke alarm went off. I stood on the steps and casually tossed the WD-40 and the lighter into the yard before sitting down. A whirlwind of thoughts and emotions enveloped me in front of the door. Yes, I felt fear and uncertainty about my future, but I didn't have a drop of regret. That's it. I sat and waited. It was a good day. It seemed like a long time before I heard sirens in the distance. It turned out that in the near future, I had to sit and wait a lot. I offered no resistance to the police and didn't utter a word, except for brief confirmations that I was obeying while being detained and processed. I remained silent during the interrogation. I knew I didn't have to say anything, and it didn't make sense. There was no doubt about what had happened. Story 2. I'm a 29-year-old male, and I met my wife, who is 30 years old, when we were both working as summer interns during college at an ad agency. We hit it off, and we started dating. It was a little difficult because we both lived in the same city, but we went to school in different states. When the semester kicked back up, we decided that we wanted to try a long-distance relationship. It worked out fine for both of us, and after we graduated, we both moved to the same city, and we decided to live together. We got married a year after moving in together. Everyone we knew was trying to tell us that it was too soon to get married and that we were being naive by thinking that a year of living together was enough time to truly know if we were meant to be. But we ignored all of them. For the first 6 years of our marriage, we didn't have any issues. We were both working hard to make it at our jobs, started a family, and bought a house. It was exactly what we both wanted. However, after several years of being disrespected by her employers and treated poorly, my wife decided to leave her job and pursue employment elsewhere. In the end, it turned out to be one of the best decisions of her life because she ended up working with some people who respected her, and there was actually room for growth. When she started this new job, a lot of her coworkers were super friendly and invited her to go out with them. They just wanted to get to know her because it was apparently a very close-knit company. She was excited to get to know people that she might consider friends. I didn't think anything of it. In fact, I was very supportive of her going and making friends. It can be very difficult to make new friends as an adult, so it was great that she was doing so. She continued going to these outings once every couple of weeks. They usually did it around payday. Every time they went, somebody else would foot the bill. It was a nice little ritual that my wife was happy to be involved in. About 5 months into her employment, she went out with her friends and didn't come home until the morning. I was worried sick. Normally, if she was going to be out later than 11 p.m., she would text me and tell me, I tried calling her and reaching out to her, but I didn't get any response. Honestly, I was close to calling the police and filing a missing person report. She came home around 5 a.m., and I was still awake because I was too anxious to sleep. She was disheveled and groggy, very clearly hungover. Right away, I confronted her and asked her where she was, telling her that not only did she worry me, but she worried our son too. She apologized and told me that she couldn't argue about it. Apparently, they were celebrating one of her coworkers' birthdays, and she had drunk way too much. She ended up crashing at one of her coworkers' houses because they were within walking distance. I could see that she was in a lot of pain, so I didn't push her any further. She apologized and went to lay down. I was extremely annoyed, and for the rest of the day, I was avoiding her because of my frustration. We talked about it a couple of days later because I was still annoyed, and she told me that she wouldn't let it get out of hand like that again. She actually ended up not going to the outing for a few weeks. She ended up calling me one Friday after work and telling me that some of her coworkers had practically begged her to go, so she asked me if it was all right. I was fine with it, as long as she wasn't getting trashed again. Once again, she ended up coming back later than usual. This time she didn't spend the night somewhere else, but she came back around 2 a.m. She was completely drunk when she came in, but I did my duty as a husband and made sure she was okay. I got her some water, gave her some Advil, and tucked her into bed. I was helping her change out of her work clothes. I couldn't help but notice that her shirt was on inside out. On top of that, there was a strong musky cologne scent coming from it. Right away, I was suspicious that something had happened that night. She wasn't in any condition to talk about it, so I asked her about it the following morning. She told me I was crazy and that she would never do anything to risk hurting me or our son. But I couldn't help but wonder why her shirt was inside out. She went out the following week, and once again, didn't come home until the middle of the night. She was drunk and apologizing to me, which I assumed at the time was because of how drunk she was. Once again, I smelled the same cologne as last time. That was enough for me. When she passed out, I grabbed her phone and looked through it. I found her workgroup chat and looked through all of the messages. Then I searched her private chats with them all. I found one with a coworker, let's call him Jim. She and Jim had apparently kissed. My wife had messaged him and told him that it was just a drunken mistake and it wouldn't happen again. She told him that there was nothing they needed to worry about as long as it didn't happen anymore. But Jim wanted to go even further. He told her that they had been flirting and he had been thinking about it for a long time. It was surprisingly easy for my wife to confess that she was also thinking about him the night before. Jim texted her and asked her if she would go out for drinks. She was hesitant to do so because she worried that they would take a step further in their relationship. Jim said that he wasn't going to pressure her to do anything that she didn't want to, but he just wanted to be around her. She agreed to go, and what happened after that, I could only assume was them pushing their relationship to the next level. However, I didn't have any proof that they had sex. I didn't say anything about it right away because I wanted that proof before I confronted her, and she tried to deny it again. She told me the following Wednesday that she was going to go out on Friday night again. I told her it was fine. That gave me just enough time to hire a babysitter and follow her as she did. She went out to the bar with her colleagues, and I could see them through one of the windows while I sat in my car outside. One by one, all of her colleagues were leaving the bar and going home. My wife stayed until she was left with Jim all alone as the last colleague left. Jim reached over, grabbed her, and kissed her. My wife wrapped her arms around his shoulders and really soaked in the embrace. I snapped a couple of pictures of that, but I needed more proof than a kiss. They paid the bill and shortly after hopped into Jim's car. I followed them to a parking lot where they went off in the distance, far away from everyone else. It was clear that they were having sex in the car. I got the evidence that I needed, but I was curious about why they didn't just go to Jim's house. I looked him up online and found that he was married with 3 children, and his wife was pregnant with their 4th. I felt sick to my stomach. I was disgusted by them both. There was no way that my wife didn't know about his family. It might have been extremely impulsive at the time, but I was furious with them. I called the cops and reported them for having sex in the car. It was dark out, but it was still clear what was going on in there. They were in public, in a parking lot where anybody could walk by. I stayed and watched while a cop car strolled up and pulled them both out of the vehicle to talk to them. They weren't arrested, but the cop did slap them with a fine or ticket for public indecency. I thought it was hilarious. My wife was going to have to explain that to me. I couldn't wait to see what she came up with. When I got back home, I sent the babysitter away before my wife got there, curious to see what she would tell me about her night. I asked her how it was, and she huffed that she got fined for public indecency. I played dumb and asked how she got it. She told me that she was walking, and the wind blew her skirt up near a cop, and they thought she flashed them. It didn't even make sense. She was too intoxicated to come up with a decent lie. I told her that it was funny that that's what she got charged for when she was having sex in public. Then I showed her the evidence I found. She tried to play it off like I was the bad guy for calling the police on her. She told me this would be on her permanent record, and her life would be impacted. I told her that wasn't my problem and that I was going to be divorcing her. I grabbed my son and drove to my mother's house to stay for the weekend. As for Jim, he got the public indecency charge, but since he was so clearly intoxicated, he was also given a DUI. His wife ended up leaving him, and I felt really bad for what happened with them, so I reached out to talk to her. I told her that if she ever needed anything or any help with the kids, I would be happy to lend a hand where I could. I won the house in the divorce, and my wife was forced to quit her job and leave the city to go stay with her parents while she figured out what else to do. OP, I am so sorry that you had to go through all of that. It seems like your wife realized what she was doing was wrong and tried to put a stop to it before it began. It seems like a lot of the blame here should be on Jim, but because she knew what she was doing was wrong and continued to do it anyway, they're both to blame. It's very disheartening that somebody who had 3 children and a pregnant wife would so blatantly pursue another woman. It's good that he was faced with repercussions for what he did. I think that karma really got him in the end with the added DUI charge. If he ever has to look for another job, then that's going to reflect very poorly on him, and it's going to be very difficult. I think it's very admirable that you have offered to help his ex-wife. I hope that you guys can move on, and hopefully, she ends up with a fair deal in the divorce to help with the children. Thank you for sharing with us. Story 3. I'm a 31-year-old male, and I've been with my wife, who is 30 years old, for 5 years. Recently, I found out that she cheated on me with her ex, also known as one of my best friends. We met in college at a very small school, and we were all part of the same French group. We were very close and knew practically everything about each other. At some point, almost everybody in the group had dated each other, and it felt natural because we were close, and people developed feelings for each other. After graduation, I confessed my feelings to my wife, and she told me that she felt the same. We decided to give our relationship a shot, and things went really well for us. It felt like we were always supposed to be together, and everything else before that was just trial and error. Before she and I got together, she dated my best friend. I considered him to be one of the most important people in my life. When they were dating, everybody in the group would always joke about how they were couple goals. From the outside looking in, they seemed to be perfect for each other. However, being as close to my friend as I was, I knew that they had a lot of problems. That's why when I started dating my wife, I was never worried about them wanting to get back together. Their problems were too significant for them to want to try again. Years later, my best friend met a wonderful girl, and they decided they wanted to get married. She fit right into the friend group, and everything seemed like it was going to work out fine. I would be lying if I said I never thought about my wife with my friend. Just having seen them in a relationship together, I knew how exciting everything was for them. I felt like I saw a different version of my wife when she was with him than when she was with me. When he announced his marriage, I couldn't help but notice that my wife was acting a little bit off. She said she was happy for them and that she was supportive of their engagement, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a lie. One night, I let my insecurities get the better of me while I had a couple of drinks, and I asked her about it. We ended up having a huge argument where she told me that I was wrong for even thinking she was interested in anyone else. At the end of the night, she told me to leave our apartment because she was so angry. I ended up going to my best friend's house, where I told him exactly what happened. He reassured me that when they had broken up, it was for a reason. I felt kind of silly after the fact. My best friend was about to get married, and he was happy, and my wife was happy with me. I apologized to both of them for creating drama out of nothing, and we moved on. My best friend's wedding was getting closer, and I was busy preparing for my best man speech. He meant the absolute world to me, so I wanted to do something heartfelt but also funny. I thought that maybe playing a little joke on him at first would be fitting for our relationship. During the reception, there was going to be a large projector to show some highlights of the relationship between my best friend and his fiancée. I thought it might be funny to add some embarrassing pictures of him. I had the idea to tell a few short anecdotes about how much of a mess he was before he met his fiancée, and then show some of the nicer pictures of him afterward. My wife was at work, and my computer had recently been on the fritz. So, when I went to look at all the pictures on my hard drive, I had to use my wife's computer. I didn't go looking for anything on her computer. It popped up at the most unfortunate time. She had desktop notifications set up for her Facebook account, and since all of our group chats were through Facebook Messenger, I saw a bunch of those notifications pop up while I was looking through pictures. In the middle of my search, I saw a notification come up from my best friend. It was a little bit alarming because I didn't think they really had private conversations with each other anymore. A lot of the insecurities that I had popped up again. I didn't want to snoop and look at it, so I tried to ignore it. However, shortly after I received one notification, there was another, and more kept coming up, and I was only able to read snippets of them before they would disappear. I was getting the sense that they were having an active conversation. I saw one message that said, "Maybe we ended things too early." That was enough for me to need to know more about the conversation. I opened the chat and read over the conversation they were having. I looked back further and realized that for several days they had been chatting and talking about some of the things they used to do together. My friend said that he loved his fiancée but thought that she was boring. He was complaining to my wife about their sex life and saying that it was unsatisfying to him. He remembered some of the times he and my wife used to have and described them in explicit detail. My wife went along with it instead of shutting it down. They were both talking about some of the things they did while they were studying abroad for a while, when they went on trips together, and when they were sneaking around in public. At the end of the conversation, my friend said that he thought about her while he was with his fiancée. I felt like my heart was ripped when I saw my wife admit that she thought about him while she was with me during their conversation. I was watching the entire conversation unfold in real time. They didn't want to risk throwing away the chemistry they had, so they set a date to be together, planning to figure out whether they would give their relationship another try or not. I was supposed to be going on a work retreat for one night the following Friday, so that's when they decided to meet. I began taking screenshots of some of the messages where they discussed setting a date and reminisced about their past. However, as I was doing this, the messages were being deleted. I decided to pretend like nothing was happening when my wife got home, but I was already thinking of ways to get back at them for what they were planning. The Friday they planned to meet came, and I made sure I was able to obtain evidence of their affair. I installed a remote viewing camera, and while they were in the bedroom engaging in sexual activity, I took a couple of pictures for my evidence. I got everything in order, consulted with a divorce attorney, and was ready to serve my wife with the divorce papers. The wedding day finally arrived, and I was unsure about how to proceed. I had a plan, but I began to doubt myself. I had a perfect plan to expose both my wife and my friend for their involvement, but I started to think that maybe it wasn't the right place. The more I saw my friend with his fiancée, the more I felt compelled to reveal the truth. They had both betrayed our trust, and I wanted to humiliate them. During the reception, when it was time for the speeches, I began my speech as if I were giving a nice talk about my friend. The projector came on, and instead of showing pictures of my friend and his fiancée, I displayed pictures of my friend and my wife. I was able to find some pictures that corresponded with the things they had said in their messages. I recited those messages as the pictures appeared on the screen. Toward the end, I added a picture of them sleeping together with the date, which was only 2 weeks before the wedding. Chaos erupted around us, and I just stood there and watched it happen. My wife stormed up to me and asked what I was doing, and I told her that it was over, and we would be getting divorced. My friend was getting reprimanded by his fiancée, and her father looked like he might actually harm him. It's safe to say that I completely ruined the wedding. I ended up divorcing my wife and retaining the house, the car, and everything. My friend and his fiancée annulled their marriage. His fiancée's father forced him to repay everything he had spent on the wedding and threatened litigation. My ex-wife and ex-best friend decided to try and work things out. They dated for about a week, and the same issues they had when they were in college resurfaced, leading to their breakup. So, in the end, it was all for nothing, and they revealed their true colors to everyone. OP, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Having your wife cheat on you is already bad enough, but when it's with somebody like a best friend, it's unimaginable. They were two people you thought you could trust, and they proved to be selfish and untrustworthy. Your gut instinct told you that there was something wrong with their relationship, and you were right to question her about it. Maybe at the time, there wasn't anything going on, but it seems like when they were faced with temptation, they caved in. I think it might have been better to take action before the wedding, but since your ex-best friend had to pay for the wedding, it was justified. Hopefully, you and the fiancé of your ex-friend can move past what happened, and you won't let this hold you back from meeting other genuinely good people.